"Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt," cried the waitress. What if a single cruel act could spark the most beautiful change in someone's life? Amara pressed her back against the cold brick wall behind the Junction Cafe, her uniform still damp with coffee a customer had thrown at her moments ago. The liquid had burned her forearm, but the sting of humiliation hurt even more. Her chest rose and fell quickly as she fought back tears. She wasn't crying from the pain. She was crying because of the man's final words. "Maybe if you weren't so clumsy, you wouldn't be stuck serving people like me." Those words echoed in her mind as the night wind brushed her face. She thought about her son, Eller, waiting at their neighbor Mrs. Patterson's apartment. He'd be sitting at the kitchen table, doing homework, probably hungry, definitely tired. She thought about the unopened electricity bill, the school trip she couldn't afford, the worn-out shoes she kept trying to patch. At 34, Amara had grown used to invisible bruises, the kind that come from exhaustion, from fighting every day just to keep food on the table. Inside the diner, a man had seen everything. Cairo Wynn sat in the corner booth, quiet, his salt and pepper locks tied back neatly. He looked like an ordinary customer, wearing faded jeans and a button-down shirt. But Cairo was far from ordinary. He was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. He'd watched the same waitress for weeks, graceful, patient, kind, and tonight he'd seen her dignity crushed for no reason. Something inside him stirred, anger, sadness, and a deep sense of purpose. Amara had worked at the cafe for 8 months, ever since the car parts factory, where she'd spent 6 years shut down. That job had paid $15 an hour with benefits, enough to survive. Losing it had felt like the ground collapsing beneath her feet. Now, the cafe job barely covered rent, but she still showed up every day, serving with a quiet dignity her mother had taught her long ago. "Baby," her mama used to say, "there's no shame in any honest work. The shame is in how people treat those who serve them." Most customers were kind, truckers, elderly couples, families passing through. But lately, a few seemed to take pleasure in making her feel small. They'd roll their eyes when she spoke, whisper when she turned her back, or treat her like she didn't exist. She'd learned to smile anyway, to keep her voice calm, even when her hands shook. But some days were harder than others. Like today, when Eller had cried over his torn shoes, when her old car's engine light blinked on again, when her body ached from standing all day. Those were the days her armor cracked. Cairo had been visiting the cafe for 3 weeks, always ordering black coffee and whatever pie was fresh. He dressed plainly, drove an old pickup, and spoke gently. He always said please and thank you, leaving generous tips. Amara thought he might be a mechanic or a contractor, someone who knew what hard work felt like. Once, she'd mixed up his order and brought apple pie instead of pecan. She'd apologized, but he had simply smiled and said, "Apple pie sounds perfect." "Thank you, Amara." That small kindness had nearly made her cry. What Amara didn't know was that Cairo wasn't there for the food. He was studying. His company, the Wynn Collective, specialized in rescuing struggling community businesses. But Cairo didn't believe in numbers alone. He believed in people, in seeing how they treated each other when no one important was watching. He had grown up poor in Atlanta, raised by his mother, Dorothy Wynn, who worked 3 jobs and still made sure her kids had hope. "Education is your way out," she used to tell him. She died before seeing her son's success, but her lessons had shaped his every decision. The man who had humiliated Amara was Trent Halden, a regular customer and a bully who seemed to enjoy making the staff miserable. Cairo had noticed his behavior before: spilled drinks, nasty remarks, no tips. But tonight was the last straw, when Trent accidentally knocked his coffee cup over, burning Amara's arm, then laughed and called her clumsy. Cairo's jaw tightened. The racial undertone was obvious, yet the room had fallen silent. No one spoke up. No one ever did. Cairo watched Amara's shoulders tense, her lips tremble as she forced herself to apologize. When she ran outside, he knew what he had to do. Moments later, Amara returned, dabbing at her eyes. Trent waved at her impatiently. "Hurry up with that coffee," he barked, "and try not to spill it this time." The diner went quiet again. An older couple looked away. A trucker gripped his cup harder. A young mother pulled her kids close. Everyone saw. No one moved. Then Cairo stood up. His tall frame straightened with quiet strength. He walked toward Trent's table slowly, calmly, like a man who had already made up his mind. Trent frowned. "What do you want?" "I'm trying to get some service here." "I've been watching you," Cairo said, his voice low but steady. "For weeks. Watching you treat this woman with no respect at all." The diner froze. His tone wasn't angry. It was controlled, deliberate. The kind of voice that came from someone used to commanding rooms full of power. Trent snorted. "Mind your own business, pal. If she can't handle the job, she shouldn't have it." He turned toward Amara. "Well, are you gonna pour or not?" Her hands trembled as she lifted the coffee pot. She couldn't afford to lose her job. Rent was due. Bills were piling up. Eller needed her. So she did what she always did. She swallowed the pain and tried to stay small. But before she could pour, Cairo placed his hand over the cup. "No," he said quietly. "You don't need to serve someone who treats you like you're less than human." The sound of her own name in his calm voice made Amara freeze. She looked at him, eyes wide, heart pounding. No one had ever stood up for her before. Cairo turned to Trent. "Every person in this diner has a story. People who love them, dreams, struggles. The difference between you and them is that they don't hurt others to feel important. Whatever makes you believe you need to make someone else small to feel big, that's something you need to fix. But not here. Not tonight." Trent's face turned red. He pushed his chair back. "Who the hell do you think you are? Some blue-collar nobody?" Cairo's eyes didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I know the difference between a man and a bully." He reached into his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, and laid it on the table. "Your meals are covered for a month, but from now on, you'll treat every person here with respect, or you can find somewhere else to eat." The room was silent. The owner, Ms. Marcellini, stood frozen at the kitchen door, wooden spoon in hand, watching with disbelief. Amara's eyes filled with tears, not of shame, but of gratitude. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, really seen her. Trent mumbled something under his breath, threw a few bills on the table, and stormed out. The door slammed behind him. Cairo looked around the diner. "How we treat people who serve us," he said softly, "says everything about us and nothing about them." The diner stayed silent for several long seconds after Trent stormed out. Then the tension slowly melted away, replaced by quiet murmurs and the clink of cups. A few customers nodded at Amara, offering small smiles of support. The older couple in the corner called her over and left a $20 tip on their $15 meal. It wasn't much, but it felt like validation, proof that someone finally saw her worth. Amara's hands were still shaking as she set the coffee pot on the counter. She could feel every beat of her heart. When she turned around, Cairo was standing a few steps away, his expression soft, his presence somehow steadying the room. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I could have handled it. I've dealt with worse." Cairo smiled gently. "I know you could have. You've been handling it for a long time. But just because you can endure something doesn't mean you should have to." The words hit her deeper than she expected. She felt a lump rise in her throat, the kind that forms when someone finally says the thing you've been too tired to admit to yourself. He gestured toward his booth. "Would you sit with me for a moment? Just a few minutes." Amara hesitated. Marcellini, the owner, was watching from the kitchen window, pretending to be busy but clearly listening. When their eyes met, the older woman gave a subtle nod, a silent permission. The dinner rush was over anyway. So Amara walked to the booth and sat down across from him. Up close, she could see the faint wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the gray in his hair, and a weariness that seemed to come from more than just long workdays. "I'm Cairo," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Amara," she replied, shaking it cautiously, "though I guess you already knew that." He chuckled softly. "Yes, I did. And I owe you an apology." Her eyebrows rose. "An apology? For what?" "You just stood up for me. For sitting here for 3 weeks watching that man treat you terribly. And saying nothing until tonight," he said. "I was trying to understand this place, but I should have acted sooner." She frowned slightly. "Understand this place? What do you mean?" Cairo took a breath, his tone measured. I'm in the restaurant business. I was considering buying the Junction Cafe. Amara's heart sank. The words felt heavy. She'd seen this story before. Big companies buying small places, promising improvements, then closing them down to make way for condos or chain stores. She thought about all the people who would lose their jobs, including her. "Oh," she said quietly, forcing a smile. "Then I guess I should get back to work while I still have one." She started to slide out of the booth, but Cairo stopped her gently. "Wait," he said. "I'm not here to shut this place down. What I've learned here isn't about profit. It's about people. You, especially me." She asked, confused. He nodded. "I've watched you cover shifts for sick co-workers, treat every customer with kindness, even the rude ones. You remember how people like their coffee. You pay attention. You lead by example. That's rare." Amara's brow furrowed. "How do you know about my struggles?" "Because I recognize them," Cairo said softly. "I grew up watching my mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I know that look, the exhaustion mixed with determination. I know what it means to hold your head high when life keeps knocking you down." His eyes drifted, filled with memory. "My mama used to come home so tired she'd fall asleep helping me with homework. I'd wake up and find her still sitting at the kitchen table, her head on my math book, still wearing her work uniform. She gave everything so I could have a chance." Amara swallowed hard. "I understand that," she whispered. "My mom was the same way." Cairo smiled faintly. "That's why I noticed you. You reminded me of her, her strength, her grace, her quiet pride." He reached into his wallet and handed her a simple white business card. The heavy cardstock gleamed under the diner's lights. She glanced at it, then looked again. "Cairo Wynn, CEO, Wynn Collective." Her eyes widened. You're a CEO. "Just a man who believes that good business starts with treating people right," he said. "And you've shown me exactly what that looks like." Amara's voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want to buy this diner," Cairo said, leaning forward slightly. "But I don't just want to own it. I want to build something that honors this community. And I want you to help me." She blinked, sure she'd misheard. "Help you? I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about running a business." He shook his head. "You know more than you think. You know how to make people feel welcome. You know this neighborhood. You understand what it's like to struggle and how to keep showing up anyway. That's leadership, Amara." Her eyes filled again. "I never finished college," she said quietly. "I was studying hospitality management, but then I got pregnant with Eller. I had to drop out. His father left. My mom got sick. Life happened," Cairo said gently. "But you didn't give up. You kept moving. That's what matters." She looked down, shaking her head. "There must be someone more qualified. Someone who actually deserves this." Cairo smiled, his voice calm and sure. "You deserve it. Because you've lived it. I can teach numbers, budgeting, marketing. But I can't teach compassion or courage or heart. You already have those." The silence between them grew warm, heavy with possibility. He continued, "I'm offering a partnership, Amara, not just a job. You'd have a real stake in this place. I'll handle the business side, the financing, the legal work. But I need someone who can lead with heart, someone who sees people, not numbers." Amara felt dizzy, like the ground beneath her was shifting. "I can't," she whispered. "I have a son. I can't risk everything on a dream. People like me don't get chances like this." "Your son is the reason you should take it," Cairo said softly. "Every decision we make will be about building a future for families like yours. Fair wages, health care, education programs, real change." She stared at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Why me?" "Because I've watched you treat people with respect when no one else did," he said. "Because leadership isn't about power, it's about kindness. And you've already proven you have it." Amara looked down at her trembling hands, then back at him. The tiredness in her chest began to feel lighter, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. "What would you say," Cairo asked quietly, "if I told you that in 6 months, you could be running the finest community restaurant in 3 states? That your son's life could be completely different?" Amara couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears rolling freely now. 6 months later, the diner was unrecognizable. The place that had once smelled of burnt coffee and stale grease now glowed with life and warmth. The new sign above the door read Amara's Hearth in soft gold letters. Inside, sunlight streamed through wide windows, catching the rich brown of polished wood floors and the soft earth tones of the booths. The air carried the scent of freshly baked cornbread and slow-simmered greens. Amara stood near the counter, watching her 8-year-old son, Eller, arrange flowers on the tables with quiet pride. His smile lit up the room. The same boy who used to cry about torn shoes and empty lunch boxes now hummed as he worked, confident and happy. She could hardly believe how far they'd come. The transformation had been more than physical. It was spiritual, communal, and deeply human. Every inch of the restaurant carried a story, a shared piece of love and labor. The walls displayed artwork from local Black artists. One corner held a colorful mural of hands planting seeds, painted by high school students who'd volunteered to help. Another wall carried a bulletin board covered in job postings, local event flyers, and photos of neighborhood kids who'd made the honor roll. Even the smallest details had meaning. The bookshelf by the window was filled with donated books, a free community library for anyone who wanted to read. The chalkboard near the door read, "You belong here." Amara took a deep breath, still amazed. 6 months ago, she'd been standing outside in tears, her uniform soaked with spilled coffee. Now, she was running a restaurant that had become the heart of the community. Every employee now earned a living wage, $22 an hour, with full health care and retirement benefits. The staff included the single mothers who'd been barely getting by, a retired teacher named Mr. Washington who worked mornings to stay active, and 3 teenagers saving for college through a matching fund Cairo had helped create. Amara had discovered a gift she never knew she had, a talent for organizing, leading, and inspiring others. Cairo had guided her every step of the way, mentoring her in business management, budgeting, and leadership. She took online courses at night, studying after Eller went to bed, her determination shining stronger than exhaustion. Marcellini, the cafe's original owner, had stayed on as head cook and part owner. Her traditional recipes, golden fried chicken, collard greens simmered for hours, and buttery cornbread, now sat beside new dishes Amara had helped design after listening to customers' stories about their families and traditions. They served comfort food with purpose, meals that told stories. The smell of sweet potato pie filled the air every Sunday, bringing back memories of home for everyone who walked through the door. But there were also healthier options: grilled fish, fresh salads, and vegetarian soul food, dishes that reflected the growing diversity of the neighborhood. Cairo had been right. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol of hope. The Wall of Kindness, an idea inspired by Eller, had become one of Amara's proudest additions. Customers could buy a meal voucher and pin it to the wall for anyone in need. No questions, no shame, just quiet generosity. The wall never stayed empty for long. Every week, people came to take a voucher, eat a meal, and leave a thank you note in its place. One note read, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." Another said, "You reminded me what kindness feels like." Every Sunday, the restaurant hosted a free community breakfast where kids ate for free, and local organizations could share resources, job opportunities, free tutoring, health clinics, even voter registration drives. The local church held youth meetings there on Wednesday nights. The NAACP chapter gathered monthly. Job skills workshops took place every other Saturday. Amara's Hearth had become the beating heart of the town, a place where people came not just to eat, but to connect, to heal, to belong. Cairo still visited often, but now he preferred to sit at the counter, sipping his black coffee while chatting with Amara about future plans. They were already talking about opening 3 new locations, each one to be led by someone like Amara, someone who understood struggle and resilience. "I don't want franchises," Cairo had told her once. "I want families, communities that grow stronger because people believe in each other." Amara smiled at the memory, watching her son set a vase on a table. He'd changed so much, his eyes, once dimmed by worry, now sparkled with curiosity. He talked about becoming a chef or maybe even a business owner like his mom. Her chest swelled with pride. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. Later that afternoon, Cairo walked in, his tall frame filling the doorway. The staff greeted him warmly, not as a powerful CEO, but as part of their family. He handed Amara 2 cups of coffee, both in special mugs printed with the restaurant's logo. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, smiling that familiar, gentle smile. Amara laughed softly, accepting the cup. "Just thinking about how much can change in 6 months. How one small act of kindness can change everything." Cairo nodded. "You saw that, and you've been doing the same thing ever since. Every person who walks in here leaves better than they came." Amara's gaze moved to her staff, to the laughter in the kitchen, to Mr. Washington helping one of the teenagers learn how to balance the register, to Marcellini humming as she stirred her famous collard greens. She turned back to Cairo. "You saw something in me that I didn't see in myself." He smiled. "That's what you do now every day. You see people, you give them a chance to believe in themselves." As they stood together, the golden afternoon light poured through the windows, reflecting off the words painted above the counter. "Kindness is the foundation of every meal." Customers began to trickle in for the dinner rush. A young mother with her children, a couple holding hands, an elderly man walking in slowly with his cane. Amara greeted each one by name, her voice warm, her eyes bright. This wasn't just her job anymore. It was her legacy, a living, breathing example of what compassion could build. She glanced at Cairo again. "You know," she said, smiling, "I never thanked you properly. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For changing my life, and my son's." Cairo shook his head. "You changed your own life, Amara. I just gave you the space to shine. You did the rest." At that moment, Eller came running up, waving a small paper menu he'd drawn in crayon. "Look, Mom, I made a new kids' meal idea, mac and cheese with apple slices." Amara laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I think we'll put it on the menu," she said softly. Cairo looked at them, his heart swelling with pride. This was why he'd started the Win Collective. Not for profit, but for people. As laughter filled the restaurant, and the smell of fresh bread wafted through the air, Amara looked around her new world and thought about that night she'd stood in the cold, behind the diner, humiliated and hopeless. She'd never imagined that the very moment that broke her would become the one that rebuilt her. Evening sunlight painted the inside of Amara's hearth with gold as the dinner crowd settled in. The room was filled with soft laughter, the clatter of plates, and the low hum of conversation that spoke of comfort and belonging. Amara moved between the tables, checking on customers, greeting them by name, sharing small smiles that made everyone feel like family. Everywhere she looked, there was a story. Mr. Johnson and his wife, seated by the window, were celebrating her clean bill of health after a long battle with cancer. The Martinez family had come in to mark their daughter's college acceptance. In the corner, a young man named Marcus was hunched over a math workbook. He was studying for his GED, encouraged by Amara to use one of the quiet booths during off hours. This was what success looked like to her now, not numbers on a spreadsheet, but lives changed. Spirits lifted, hope restored. When the last customer of the night left, Amara turned the open sign to closed and locked the door. The staff cleaned up quickly, laughing and teasing each other as they wiped tables and stacked chairs. Eller helped sweep the floor, humming a tune under his breath. Cairo arrived as the final lights were dimmed. He had come straight from the airport, still wearing his blazer and carrying a briefcase. Yet his face softened the moment he stepped inside. He looked around with quiet pride, taking in the place he and Amara had built together. "How was Detroit?" she asked, pouring him his usual cup of black coffee. "Promising," he said with a smile. "The community center there wants to turn an old gym into something like this. But before I say yes, I wanted to hear what you think." Amara set the coffee down and leaned against the counter. "I think we should find someone local, someone who knows the heartbeat of that neighborhood, someone who's struggled like I did. That's what makes this place work." Cairo nodded, smiling. "You've learned fast." "I had a good teacher," she said, teasing gently. He chuckled. "No, you had the heart. I just helped you see it." They walked through the restaurant together, pausing near the wall of kindness. Dozens of colorful meal vouchers fluttered there, each pinned with love. Handwritten notes filled the spaces between them, thank yous, encouragements, offers of help. "Look at this," Cairo murmured, reading one aloud. "I came in here hungry and hopeless. I left with a full stomach and faith in people again." Amara smiled softly. "Those words mean more than any prophet report. They're the proof," Cairo said, "that when people feel seen and respected, they give back tenfold." They sat down at a booth, both tired but content. Amara rubbed her hands together, still not used to the idea that she was a business owner now. 6 months ago, she could barely pay rent. Now she had employees depending on her, and a purpose bigger than survival. "I never thought my life could look like this," she admitted. "I used to pray just to get through another week. Now I'm planning new locations." Cairo leaned back, his gaze warm. "That's what happens when you stop surviving and start leading." She tilted her head. "You talk like you've seen this before." He smiled faintly. "I've seen it, but not often enough. Most people with potential never get the chance. I started the Win Collective to change that, to find people like you, and help them build something that matters." Amara looked at him, her eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You know, when I first saw you here, I thought you were just a quiet guy who liked pie." He laughed. "I do like pie," she grinned. "But now I understand why you were really here. You were looking for people who still cared." "I was looking for hope," he said softly, "and I found it in you." A comfortable silence followed. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the faint sweetness of pie. Outside, the last streaks of sunset faded into the night. Amara glanced toward the kitchen, where Marcellini was humming as she finished prepping dough for tomorrow's morning biscuits. "You know," Amara said thoughtfully, "I think my mama would have loved this place." Cairo smiled. "Tell me about her." "She was a nurse's aide," Amara said, her voice gentle with memory. "Worked long shifts, came home tired, but never stopped smiling. She used to tell me, 'Baby, the way you treat people when no one's watching, that's who you really are.' That's a lesson worth keeping," Cairo said quietly. "I think that's what we're doing here," Amara replied. "Building a place where kindness isn't a performance, it's just who we are." Cairo nodded, visibly moved. "Your mother would be proud." Amara blinked back tears, smiling through them. "I hope so." They sat for a long time, talking about plans, new recipes, community programs, and how to train future managers who shared the same vision. The idea was simple but powerful: create businesses that serve people, not just profit. As Cairo gathered his briefcase to leave, he paused. "You know, when I first watched you that night, after that man spilled coffee on you, I realized something. People talk about leadership like it's about control, but it's really about courage. You showed more courage that night than most executives I've met." Amara met his eyes, her voice soft. "I wasn't brave. I was just trying to hold myself together." "That's bravery," he said. "Doing what's right even when you're afraid." She smiled, her chest tightening with gratitude. "Thank you, Cairo, for seeing me when I felt invisible." He shook his head gently. "You were never invisible. You just needed someone to remind you of your light." As he walked out into the cool night, Amara stood by the door, watching the streetlights reflect off the window glass. The words painted on it, "You belong here," glowed faintly against the dark. Inside, Eller finished his sweeping and ran up to her, hugging her waist. "Mom, can we make banana pudding tomorrow? Mr. Johnson said it's his favorite." Amara laughed, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll make the best banana pudding in the world." As he ran off, she looked around the empty restaurant. The silence was full, not lonely, but peaceful. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving the world. She was shaping it. The memory of that night still lived inside her. The humiliation, the coffee, the pain, but it no longer hurt. It was the moment everything began. Sometimes, she thought, it takes being broken for the light to finally get in. Morning came softly to Amara's hearth. The sun filtered through the wide front windows, spilling golden light across the polished tables and the framed photos lining the wall. Snapshots of smiling employees, community events, and children from the neighborhood who had once come in hungry and now stopped by just to say hello. Amara stood behind the counter, watching her staff prepare for the breakfast rush. Laughter and the clatter of dishes filled the air. Marcellini was at the stove, singing an old gospel tune as she flipped pancakes. Mr. Washington was helping one of the teenagers balance the cash drawer, explaining the importance of every dollar and every smile. This was more than a restaurant now. It was a living, breathing reflection of everything Amara had once prayed for: stability, purpose, family, dignity. Eller dashed past, carrying a small stack of menus almost as tall as him. He was wearing his new glasses and his favorite green sneakers. "Mom, we need more syrup at table 4. He called out with mock seriousness, making everyone laugh. Amara smiled. "On it, Chef Eller." He giggled and disappeared into the kitchen, his confidence shining as bright as the morning sun. She thought back to how far they had come, from standing outside a cold diner, humiliated and hopeless, to this moment of peace. The scars from that night had faded, but the lessons remained. She had learned that dignity is not something people give you. It's something you protect, even when others try to take it away. The bell over the door jingled. Cairo walked in, dressed casually in a dark sweater and jeans. He waved to the staff, who greeted him like family. Amara poured him his usual black coffee before he even asked. "You read my mind," he said with a grin. "I just know your routine," she replied. "So what's new?" He took a slow sip and exhaled with contentment. "We're ready to expand. Detroit is next, and after that, maybe Atlanta." "Atlanta?" she said, surprised. "That's your hometown." He nodded, smiling faintly. "Feels right to bring it full circle." Amara leaned on the counter, intrigued. "And who will run those places?" Cairo smiled knowingly. "People like you. People who've been overlooked, but have heart, strength, and vision. I want you to help me find them." Her eyebrows lifted. "Me? You know what to look for," he said. "You can see potential where others see struggle. That's what makes this work." Amara hesitated, humbled. "I don't know, Cairo. I'm still learning." He chuckled softly. "We're all still learning. That's the secret." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder labeled Expansion Plan. Inside were sketches of new restaurants modeled after Amara's hearth, each one designed to reflect its own neighborhood, each one built around community and compassion. Amara traced her fingers over the drawings, speechless. "You really mean it," she whispered. "You're going to change everything." Cairo looked at her with quiet conviction. "No, Amara, we're going to change everything." Later that afternoon, after the lunch rush, Amara stepped outside for a moment. The warm breeze carried the scent of cornbread and coffee into the street. A small crowd was gathered near the community board, a young mother picking up a meal voucher, an elderly man pinning one up, to teenagers laughing as they hung flyers for a tutoring program. She smiled, realizing this board had become more than just paper and pins. It was a bridge between people, proof that kindness multiplies when you give it room to grow. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Penny for your thoughts." She turned to find Cairo standing beside her again, holding 2 cups of lemonade instead of coffee this time. "Just thinking," she said, accepting the drink, "about how one act of kindness can change more lives than we'll ever know." He nodded slowly. "You've become what my mother used to call a ripple maker. Someone who doesn't just touch one life, they create waves." Amara laughed softly. "I like that. A ripple maker." They stood together in silence, watching Eller play near the flower boxes that lined the sidewalk. He was teaching a smaller child how to fold paper boats and float them in a puddle, left by the morning rain. "That's your legacy," Cairo said quietly. "Not this building, not the business. Him and everyone he'll grow up to help because of what he's seen here." Amara's eyes glistened. "You know, I used to tell myself I was unlucky," she said. "That life had passed me by, but now I realize everything that broke me was just clearing space for something better." Cairo smiled, his voice soft. "Sometimes it takes being seen by one person to remind us who we already are." She nodded, her voice almost a whisper. "Thank you, Cairo, for giving me that chance." He shook his head gently. "No, Amara, you gave the world a reason to believe again." Inside, laughter and music filled the restaurant. Marcellini had started dancing while flipping pancakes, and the staff joined her, clapping and laughing. Eller burst through the door again, waving his paper boat triumphantly. "Mom, look what I made," he said proudly. Amara crouched down, hugging him tight. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Just like you." As the afternoon light poured across the room, she glanced around at everything she and Cairo had built, the smiling faces, the full tables, the walls covered in hope. Every corner of Amara's hearth told a story of second chances. She thought of the words she wanted everyone to remember. The most powerful thing we can do is choose kindness, even when no one's watching. When evening came, she turned off the lights one by one. The last glow came from the mural near the door, the painted hands planting seeds, reaching upward toward the words, "From struggle grows strength." Amara smiled to herself. She knew this was just the beginning. Outside, Cairo waited beside his truck. "Ready to talk about Detroit?" he asked. Amara grinned, tucking her apron into her bag. "I think I already know what kind of person we need. Someone like me, who just needs a chance." Cairo nodded. "Then let's find her." As they drove off into the sunset, the lights of Amara's hearth glowed behind them, a beacon for anyone who had ever felt unseen, reminding the world that dignity, when nurtured with kindness, could change everything. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales about courage, kindness, and second chances.